So this is Carly Spotts-Falzone. I'm here with Chip Sharratt in his house. It's 9:30 Saturday, November 26th, and we're just gonna start our interview about the Vietnam War. Okay, Chip, so just first a little biographical information. Where were you born and when?
I was born August 21st, 1952 in Minneapolis. That's in Minnesota. And I was born at a hospital called the Swedish Hospital, which may still exist but doesn't have the same name.
Yeah.
And my parents had just purchased a home in Richfield about 6 months before I was born. So I moved into a brand new home, and my parents ended up living there for 50 years.
Oh.
So
What were
it's
your parents'
the only
names?
home that I ever knew. Yeah.
That's cool. What were your parents' names?
My mom's name was Veronica, and my dad's name was Lloyd. But when I was in high school, my friends who stayed at the house all the time, and I came up with nicknames for my mom and dad, which were Lightning and Blossom. And they kind of enjoyed having that identity.
That's funny. This is funny. Lightning and Blossom.
Yeah.
Did you have any siblings? Or are you the only child?
Yep. There were 6 kids in the family. The 2 oldest are girls. And then the next 4 were boys. I was the second of the 4. My oldest sister was born in 1942, 10 years ahead of me.
Wow.
And she was, my parents married in 1941, so she was conceived shortly after that and was born the following June. And my dad had to go into the Army. He was drafted into the Army. And spent a lot of his time in the United States, and then did go over to France as part of the occupation force after the war. And my mom lived the early years of their marriage in government projects, which was very interesting. That's kind of a neat story too, because she met so many interesting people. A lot of immigrants, new immigrants to the United States from all over the world, and they became close family friends, which was an important part of my development, because we had people of color in and out of our house all the time.
Yeah.
So it was kind of a neat way to grow up, and my parents quickly taught me that acceptance is important, and discrimination didn't live in our house.
Yeah. That's super cool.
Yeah. So after my oldest sister was born, my dad came back from the war. My next sister was born 4 years after my oldest sister, and then every 3 years after that there was another kid born. So I don't know how my mom did that they had clockwork or something. For me it's easy to remember everybody's birthday, because I just...
Yeah.
My oldest sister's 10, then everybody else is separated by 3 years from the previous one. So
Yeah.
pretty easy way
It's
to
fun.
remember.
Did you like growing up with so many siblings? Did you have fun?
What was interesting is we grew up in a very small 3-bedroom home, unfinished basement, and 1 bathroom. So we had eight people.
Wow.
in a small house. And we say wow, but my mom and dad both came from big families. And my dad had like 8 in his family. My mom had 11. And they grew up on farms initially, and of course they didn't have indoor plumbing
Right.
stuff, and so their perspective is a lot different than ours. But I thought it was great. I love my family. I love my siblings incredibly. We just had a great Thanksgiving, and all but two were there. One lives in New York, and one lives up north of Lake Mille Lacs, so they weren't able to come down for ours. But it's a tradition that my mom and dad set up, where they just invite everybody in, and we try to continue to do that for all the kids and the grandkids and the nieces and nephews and cousins, and it's just a lot of fun.
Fun. Sounds like a good time.
Mm-hmm.
So you said you grew up in the same house that you were born into, and is that in Minneapolis?
Richfield.
Richfield.
Yep.
Richfield. And you lived there till you were 18 and left?
No, I left when I was 17, actually.
17.
Is when I went to the academy. And so, yeah, growing up, it seems like a long time, but it goes really fast. And all of a sudden, you're gone and on your own.
Yeah. So how would you describe your childhood? Like, was it typical, or do you think that it was adventurous, or what kind of? How would you describe
I
it?
love my childhood.
Yeah.
We had a lot of. We were raised in a neighborhood that was brand new in Richfield. Richfield used to be primarily farms. It was on the outskirts, just on the southern border of Minneapolis. And then they started putting in these developments after the war to accommodate all the people that were coming back. And then the United States, went through the industrialization period, and they took a lot of the technologies and industries that they had to build airplanes and weapons, and started building things like cars and TVs and radios and all that neat stuff that United States was a key part of the development of that technology.
That's cool.
And so our neighborhood was all families like ours, a lot of kids, a lot of activities. The parents invested incredible amounts of time in making sure the kids had activities to participate in. And the other thing is, moms and dads would say to the kids, "Oh, go out and play. Come home by dinner time.
Yeah.
Come home by dark."
Yeah.
And they never worried. We'd bike, we'd go over to a friend's house, that mom and dad would kind of have an idea where we were. If they needed to call to get us home early, they knew where to call to track us down. But for the most part, they just kind of let us do our own thing.
Yeah.
Having three brothers that were all close to me made it kind of fun, because we did a lot of stuff in the backyard. We played games. We invented games.
Fun.
One of the funniest ones we did was we did a game called body climbing, and what we would do in the front yard, somebody would get on somebody's back, and we'd say, "Okay, now climb around the middle of that person's body." So you could start at the back and then crawl around and then end up back on the back. And so that takes a lot of muscle.
Right.
And for the person that's standing up, it takes a lot of strength just to kind of, and you
it.
got to hold them up as they're crawling around. And then we'd make every next climb even more difficult. We'd say, "Okay, next one, go between the legs from the back to the front, over the left shoulder, and then back on the back."
Oh my gosh.
Everybody that watched would be just laughing like crazy, because you ever play Twister?
Yeah.
And Twister's a very mild form of that, because I'll touch the red dot and touch the blue. This is like climbing over somebody's body. So the climber, is looking, what can I grab? Where can I grab?
Yeah.
To pull myself around, and the climbee is trying to keep his balance and accommodate. anyway, the point is that we, a lot of times, Mom would say, go out and play. And we go, well, what can we do? Well, find something to do. And we'd invent stuff.
Yeah, it's fun.
So, my brothers all my siblings are probably my best friends in life. And we laugh and cry and do all that stuff now as adults, and we love each other to death. And I'm hoping that my kids have kind of gotten appreciation for some of that, watching how we interact.
Yeah.
Even now as adults, because we still have fun.
That's cool. That's super important. And how, did you like school? Like, how did you do? Did you enjoy school? What's elementary, middle school, high school?
What was interesting, and jumping forward a little bit, when my kids were growing up, I was kind of a house dad, and I did Navy Reserve work, and I did some volunteer work. But I became a substitute teacher, and I did that for 7 years, and I compared the school environment that I experienced as a teacher to what I had when I was a kid. And one of the key points that I remember as a kid, my parents would always say, be attentive, be respectful, learn as much as you can, but just by nature at the time, I remember the classroom being very organized and very controlled. And then when I became a teacher, it wasn't like that anymore, which kind of disappointed me, because I think, where I thought that the amount of education that was actually going on was tempered by a teacher's intent to, be nice and kind and gentle, instead of saying, your job, this is your job, you're here to learn. So, I don't have time to correct people. You have a job, you sit in your chair, you do your work, you study, you listen. You raise your hand if you have questions. And the classroom environment changed quite a bit, and I don't know that it was necessarily a good thing. That's a little commentary. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And then, so I guess...
let me finish my school.
Oh, yeah.
So, elementary school, I had very, very old, one of the first and oldest elementary schools in Richfield. I was there until 6th grade.
Oh, really?
Then I went to junior high school, which was 7 to 9, and then high school was 10, 11, 12. Elementary school was very, very easy for me, and I always did well, and I don't know that I ever got into any serious trouble.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I ever went to the principal's office. I think I went to the principal's office once. And
what did you do?
What happened was I remember it was on the playground. There might have been 2 incidents on the playground. One we had a series of high bars, hanging bars, pull-up bars. 3 different levels. And I was walking by this bar, and a neighbor a neighbor girl that lived about half a block from my house was sitting on one of the lowest bar, and I walked by it, and she was kicking her legs up and kicked me in the lip and split my lip open. And of course I went to the nurse's office for that. And then one other time I was playing a game on the playground, and some kid was chasing after me, and I was running away, and I guess I was making too much noise or running too fast or something. But the principal happened to be out on the playground and thought that we were being inappropriate, and that was the one time I got taken to the principal's office.
Oh no.
But I don't even remember what I was doing that was bad.
Yeah. Probably nothing.
Maybe she was just in a bad mood that day or something.
Yeah.
Middle school was a lot of fun. Well, I'll go back to elementary school. I played a lot of sports in the summertime. I played football and baseball. Started that when I was about 8, and then played those sports up into high school.
Yeah.
Through high school, I still play softball today. So
You do?
yeah, it's a great game. And I coached for many years, and that was fun. Middle school, I had a teacher. I had a history teacher that she was pretty proactive about teaching kids with real-world experience about things that happen in government. And, of course, politics was important to her. Mrs. Crowley, she was an older lady, but she decided at the end of 7th grade that we were gonna have an election for student council in the junior high school, and she said to all of her classes, let's pick a candidate for, in 8th grade, a vice president of the student council, and the kids voted, and I ended up to be the candidate. And then the deal was that I had to campaign, and everybody had to help me get elected.
Yeah.
And I did, and that kind of got me on a trajectory of being considered a school leader, which turned out to be a great thing, and helped me achieve some pretty interesting accomplishments in my life. And then I tell that story because that's really what got me on that path. And then in 9th grade, 8th to 9th grade, I ran for president of the student council and got elected to that.
Yeah.
And then by the time I got into high school, I had, a little bit of a reputation of being a good student and a good guy and a leader, and then that carried on to some neat leadership opportunities in high school too.
Yeah, which I'm sure definitely helped you get into the Naval Academy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if I look back on my life, that was a life-changing experience that this teacher did what she did.
Yeah.
And then I had that opportunity to get on that track.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we're going into questions about before the war. Did you always know you wanted to be in the Navy, or is that kind of a...
Oh, that's a great story.
Yeah.
You'll like this one. So I got into high school, and I continued to get placed into positions of leadership through high school.
Yeah.
And my senior year, I was the starting halfback on the football team, and I had a junior that played second team behind me, and his older brother had gone to the Naval Academy, and his father had asked the junior who played on the football team if he knew of anybody at Richfield High School that he thought might be a good candidate for the Naval Academy. And the son said, Chip is involved in a lot of activities, and he's a school leader, and he's well respected, and he's on the football team. He's going to be captain of the gymnastics team. Had successful years playing baseball, runs track, good physical condition. So the dad calls me up and says, would you be interested in the Naval Academy? And I said, and we'll step back in just a sec, Carly, on some of the other things that were going on at the time, war related.
Yeah.
But I said that I had applied to the Coast Guard Academy because I never thought of myself as a big academy kind of person. I never thought, we had TV shows called The West Point Story and then one called Annapolis. And they probably were something of reality TV where they actually filmed some on the campuses, and you see these guys in uniform and marching and all this discipline. And I young men, young boys would look at that and go, "That's pretty cool. I could never do that."
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like that. I said, I just don't think that I have what it takes to get to one of the big academies. Coast Guard Academy is a bit smaller, and when I applied to Coast Guard, and Coast Guard said, they said, you're a pretty good kid, but your academics aren't where we want them to be. So they suggested that I go to a preparatory school for a year.
Yeah.
And so I had that on the table. And then when this father called me up and said, would you be interested? I said, well, I'm looking at the Coast Guard Academy. I suppose I could take a look at the Naval Academy. But at this time, it was like October of my senior year. And a lot of that process, for the kids that were actively pursuing it had already been doing their applications. And I said, yeah, I'll take a look at it. And he said, well, I'm going to have an admissions counselor from the Naval Academy call you up and talk to you. And I said, that'd be fine. And that gentleman, Captain Bruce, was a reserve Navy captain, called me up and he said, I understand you might be interested in the Naval Academy. I said, yes, sir. I'm willing to take a look at it. Here's where I'm at. And he said, okay, I'm going to send you some information and just kind of do the things that I ask you to do, and we'll see how it goes. And I did. He kind of walked me through the process, and by probably right around Christmas time, he called me up and he says, I'd say your chances of getting into Navy are about 100%, 99%.
Yeah.
And I said, that's pretty cool. So it's not something that I thought about a lot, but I will say this, Carly. My older brother Mike, he was kind of my mentor.
Yeah.
And I remember him during the Vietnam era talking about going into the military because he knew it might become a requirement.
Yeah.
And he said, if I had a choice, if I was going to go into the military, I think I'd really want to go into the Navy because I like what the Navy represents, and he loves being on the water too.
Yeah.
And that always stuck with me, and I think that kind of what drove me towards the Coast Guard is because Coast Guard was, not overseas. It was basically Homeland Defense kind of organization, and it was still water oriented. I said, yeah, that'd be kind of fun, and I didn't see myself as a big Navy kind of guy.
Yeah.
And then when the Naval Academy happened, I said, this is interesting, because at that point, furthest I'd ever been away from home was Iowa.
Yeah.
To Des Moines. I had an aunt that lived down in Iowa. I don't even think I'd been to Wisconsin by then yet. Oh yeah, just over the border we had some friends of my mom and dad that ran a bait shop in Wisconsin. So at 17, I found myself graduated from high school and 4 weeks after graduation, maybe even 3 weeks after graduation, I'm on an airplane for my first time, going to Annapolis by myself, and you know, plans had been made. When you get to Washington, D.C., you take a cab to Annapolis, you check into this hotel, and the next morning when you get up, you go to the academy because your report time is this. And there was probably half dozen kids from Minnesota that I was traveling with that were all doing the same thing. First time on an airplane, going away to join the Navy. And I think back on that. I think that's a pretty huge step for a young person who's never done anything like that in his life.
For sure.
But what made it easy is because I did what I did through my years in school, being with people was something that I enjoyed doing it.
Yeah.
And I had two experiences that I had when I was between my junior and senior year, where I had the opportunity to go away from home for a week. And one was to camp. I went to a Christian youth camp called Young Life.
Yeah.
In northern Minnesota, and that was just a ton of fun. The coordinator of our Young Life group is still a friend. He became a minister, and he and his wife live in California. And I was just talking to him in the last 6 months or so. He's now retired from preaching, but. You know, another influential person in my life that kind of got me, not that I was on the wrong track, but, you know, just got me a little more focused about what faith can mean to guiding your life. And then the other thing that happened is I was selected to Boys State. If you're familiar with Boys and Girls State, I was selected to go to Boys State, which was actually down at Gustavus.
Oh, cool.
when I was in between my junior and senior year, and that was interesting because it was all young men, young boys that were selected to represent their schools and then set up a form of government and be elected to positions and. Of course, the big goal is to be elected as governor, and I didn't really get all that stuff about politics. But they, you know, it's using a fire hose to teach you all about politics when you get down there. And I was down there, and I was just having fun with the process and meeting people, and I ended up. Getting elected to a city position. I think my city was Mankato. That, you know, you get assigned to different communities representing cities in the state. And the kid that was our mayor actually decided that he was going to run for governor, and he got elected governor. So then our mayor position opened up, and this is later in the week now. All the kids got to know me, and I got elected to be mayor. So I ended up with a fairly good elected position. But those two experiences, being away from home, being on my own, you know, living in a cabin with a bunch of kids and living in a dorm with Boys State kids, kind of prepared me for having that level of independence where I wasn't afraid about going out to Annapolis and starting a new process. Now, stepping back to the relationship with Vietnam, you know, Vietnam had been going on since, in a smaller way, since the early 60s, mid-60s, it started to escalate. When my older brother was graduating, or as he's getting through his high school years, the government started a program with a lottery system, and they would pick lottery numbers depending on your birthday.
Hmm.
And my brother was in college at the time working on his degree in architecture, and his lottery number was number 5. So what they would do is, if you were number 1, they would call all those number 1s in and say, you got to take your physical. If you're physically qualified, you're going to get drafted into the Army.
Wow.
Number 2, number 3, number 4. So number 5 said, you got a pretty good chance that you're going to go in. He had a student deferment, which allowed him 4 years
Mm-hmm.
of deferred draft because he was enrolled in a college program,
Mm-hmm.
which was allowed at the time by the government. When I think the lottery was drawn when you were 17 or something. I think it was when you were 17 because you were draft eligible at 18.
Yeah.
And when my lottery draft came up, I was number 33.
Oh boy.
So basically, we saw from my brother's years, up until like number 100, you had a pretty good chance that you were going to get called into the draft.
Yeah.
Called into the Army. And a lot of people that had low draft numbers might think about another service that they didn't want to serve in the Army or go to Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew that if I didn't have an alternative, but I had planned on going to college, so I knew I'd have a college deferment for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
But the Naval Academy was a good alternative because it gave me a 4-year degree in engineering. Those were the primary majors available to midshipmen at the Naval Academy.
Mm-hmm.
And and then I would be assigned to a job in the Navy, depending on what career field I was going to go into. And I was okay with that. Because all we ever saw on TV was what the Army was doing over in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
Because we didn't seem to have a purpose.
Yep.
And we can get into that a little bit more. So
Right.
that was what set up how I got to the point where I was
Yeah.
going to be going to the Naval Academy.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I guess what was life like? When did the war start for you? Like what point in your life were you at when you kind of found out that?
Well, probably
The war
I was probably like 13 or 14. Again, my brother is 3 years older than me.
Yeah.
So as he's going through high school and he's watching what's going on. And I remember there was a family right across the street from us, the older son, went in. His father was a pipe fitter. And the son went into the Navy as a CB. CB stands for Construction Battalion. So these guys would go over and build bridges and build houses and build things to help our service people fight the war, basically. The facilities-oriented kind of guys. And he joined the CBs and he went over to Vietnam. When you have a neighbor, somebody that you know, that is actually over in country participating in this war, it brings it a lot closer to home. So my brother, always in the back of his mind all the way through high school, was thinking, okay, Vietnam's out there. It's not going away.
Yeah.
And my draft number is 5, and I'm going to get called up if I don't do something. And what it did, Carly, is it forced a generation to really contemplate why we were there.
Yeah.
World War II, we know why we were drawn into that.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Japan attacked us. We're going to be fighting in the Pacific. What was going on in Germany and the invasion forces that were moving all throughout Europe, conquering lands.
Mm-hmm.
And probably at the time we didn't know about the the mass executions of segments of the population
Yeah.
that was going on. Those were situations that we had to respond to.
Right.
Vietnam was different because it was two countries that were divided, kind of like Korea, and Korea probably set the stage for Vietnam. Two countries that were divided. One was influenced strongly by communism, and communism was our fiercest enemy at the time. You know,
Yeah.
that was, we can't let communism take over the world. And so we became supportive of the governments that were set up, the democratic governments that were set up in South Vietnam. And we decided that we were going to support that government and keep the North from conquering that whole area.
Yeah.
But as it dragged on,
We
it
didn't
didn't
know.
seem like it didn't seem like we were interested in winning. And I have pretty strong feelings now about any military involvement that we get involved in, because I say unless the government is committed to winning, we shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
Because our military, and especially after World War II, was the absolute best in the world.
Yeah.
Nobody could defeat us. So one would ask the question, if we get involved in a conflict, why would it ever drag on?
Yeah.
And I say that even in today's world too. If we get drawn into a conflict, our president ought to say, here's the deal, guys. This is why this is important. But I want it won in the shortest amount of time. And unless we do that, we're not being fair to our service people.
Exactly.
So, and the world needs to understand, we don't want the United States involved because they're going to come and kick our butts.
Yeah.
And that's why I say it should always be like a last resort. You know, the U.S. says, we don't like what's going on here. You better not do this or this or this.
Yeah.
And because if, it's like your mom and dad saying, I'm going to come in there. I'm going to come in there if you don't stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
And we ought to do the same thing and say, you know what? There are certain things that are just not allowed in a world society.
Right.
And if you cross that line, somebody has to step in and say, no more. And the nice thing, I always thought about this as a kid too. I said, reading a lot of history, you read about ancient wars and even in the Middle East and in Africa and in Europe, and countries would come in, the Roman Empire continue to expand because they'd move in and they'd conduct a battle and they'd say, okay, now this piece of property belongs to us, belongs to the Roman Empire. But the United States never did that. We fought to gain independence as a nation.
Yeah.
But in Europe, we helped win the war. Did we take over anything in Europe? Yeah. Actually, we helped rebuild those countries. We helped them to maintain their independence and become strong, independent countries. Even Germany, our enemy, is now one of our strongest allies. Japan, we didn't say, okay, now we're taking over your islands. We said, no, you're going to be independent. We helped them develop technology and industry. And I remember as a kid, the products, the little toy products that we're now seeing from China, the little toy products, I'd always say, man, made in Japan. We go, well, we're trying to help develop their industry.
Yeah.
And that was a stepping stone to them become a international power in building, cars and motorcycles and stereo systems. In fact, I still got a stereo system that was built in Japan that I bought when I was at the academy.
Yeah.
So, that's what made me excited about the United States is we weren't a conquering nation.
Right.
We were a nation that went in to free a country from whatever issues they were having, oppressive governments or whatever, and then allowing them to reestablish and hopefully become a free and independent country like the United States is. So, what were we talking about? Vietnam. Vietnam, we had the opportunity to do that too.
Yeah.
But there was never an end to it. We started, I think it escalated significantly during the Kennedy administration, and LBJ was kind of left with it, but LBJ had to deal with the civil rights movement, which was going on at the same time with the the young people and getting involved in the drug world, and the music culture really kind of drove a lot of that, and all this stuff he had to deal with. And oh, by the way, there was this war going on that he was committing, hundreds of thousands of people to go fight this war, and we were losing lots of young men as a result of it, and that was something that he had to shoulder. And then when he left office, Dick Nixon came in as president, and he was left with that to deal with too. Nixon was president when I was at the academy, and I can tell a little story about that too. So Nixon gets elected, and he's then he's running for re-election, and then he probably would have got re-elected without any problem, but he decided that he wanted to make sure, so he broke some laws and tried to get some additional inside information, and all that came out. That was Watergate, which you probably read about. And it turned out that at the service academies, we usually have a senior member of the administration come talk to the graduating classes. It might be the Secretary of Defense, might be the Vice President, might be the President, might be Secretary of State. My year of graduation, and I graduated in 1974, our speaker at the graduation was Dick Nixon. You're gonna love this story. So, we knew in advance that he was coming up, but he was also dealing with Watergate at the time. And it was kind of closing in on him. And everybody was excited about him. Getting the president to speak at your graduation, it's a pretty big deal. Two things. One is the Secret Service went to all the Brigade of Midshipmen is divided up into brigade is everybody. There's 2 regiments, so you're divided into 2 regiments. Within each regiment, there's 3 battalions, so there's 6 total battalions, and within each battalion there's 6 companies, and a company might have 120 people or so. 30 people from each grade level. 30 freshmen, 30 juniors, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. And the Secret Service would go to each company because we would graduate as a company, and they'd say, okay, what? Because we always did pranks during graduation. What kind of things are you going to do at graduation? Some would come up with balloons, and they'd be blowing up balloons during the graduation ceremony, and they'd pop them up or something. And they came to our company, and we had talked about it. We said, wouldn't it be cool if we got pigeons? And we carried pigeons into the graduation ceremony in our hats, our covers we call them, and just carry those pigeons in And then when they call our company for graduation, we let the pigeons go, and they just fly over the. And the Secret Service says, you can't do that, because what if they're homing pigeons, and then what if they, attack the president or something?
Oh my gosh.
Well, that was probably a concern that they had. Well, we did it anyway.
No.
We went to a pet store and we bought pigeons. And not everybody, I think we had 28 guys that were graduating that day. And not everybody bought a pigeon, but I bought a pigeon and I carried it in. And when they called our
Oh my
name,
gosh.
we let the pigeons go. Nothing ever happened, because they didn't go after the president or anything. But it was interesting. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about it. But Nixon got up there and he has to address. And normally, whoever speaks as our speaker at graduation talks about, service and commitment, and in particular during wartime.
Yeah.
What you're going to be called to do, and the challenging circumstances of your service. And Nixon spent most of his time talking about, well, I was president, I did this and I did this.
Yeah.
And it was basically it was almost a final attempt to preserve his
image
and his administration, not to lose the presidency, because he knew he was at risk of losing his job.
Yeah.
Now, we graduated on the 5th of June in 1974. In August, he resigned.
Jeez.
So he knew that he was in trouble. I mean, serious trouble at that time. And that's why he said the things that he said. And I often wondered, because he's the one that administered our oath. He's the one that commissioned us into service. I often wondered if, after he resigned, if that invalidated our commission.
Yeah.
But so that was that was all part of the process, and whatever caused him to do the things that he did to guarantee. I mean, he won in a landslide. He didn't have to do anything, but he was influenced by somebody, and maybe he was paranoid and made some bad decisions, and it cost him the presidency. Actually, before my graduation, the war really ended in 1973.
Yeah.
So that possibility of having to deploy to Vietnam went away.
Yeah.
My recollections, even from high school, every night on the news we'd see. I mean, that was the first time the press was really embedded with forces, and you could see these guys fighting in the jungles, and people coming home in body bags, and some of our, one of the things that we tried to do more than anything to advance the South Vietnamese efforts towards the north is the U.S. conducted air raids, air assaults on targets. And, again, we were never really serious about it.
Yeah.
That we did it just to kind of show that we were still there, but there was never an intent to go 100% and just end the war.
Yeah.
Get the North to surrender. If that could have been done, there's some questions of how involved the Chinese were in supporting the efforts, and the risk of dragging in a major power like China into the war.
Well, what was your understanding of why we were involved in the war in the first place?
Because we were trying to stop communism from expanding in that area of the country.
Yeah.
China was communist, and North Vietnam was communist, and the South said we want to continue. South Vietnam wanted to continue to be a democratic nation. We were supportive of that. No different than North and South Korea.
Yep.
And that war never resolved. We gotta demilitarize the line, zone to separate the countries. It's never been resolved, and look where we're at now.
Yeah.
South Korea's democratic, independent, and a powerhouse. A lot of products that we get in the United States are made in South Korea. North Korea has probably one of the lowest standard of living, but it has one of the biggest militaries because the leaders have always said, "Oh, we got to maintain military strength," and that's where they put all their money. They don't put it into the population. They don't put it into industry.
Yeah.
So our fear was that the same thing would happen in Vietnam, and it's interesting that a unified Vietnam has actually become more industrialized, much like China. Look what China's doing now in our country. China has replaced Japan as this country that provides all these products.
Right.
But China has advanced much more quickly to develop, a lot of high tech industries and products and world power. Holy moly.
True. Well, and kind of going back to like...
Okay.
back to, I guess remember when you were in high school. Do you remember what life was like before the war? Like, was it drastically different from after you started to get news of it? I guess from your brother or from whoever. Was life totally different?
I'm trying to think of a good analogy. The analogy might be, I'm sitting in my home and I find out that my school's on fire. Okay? And if I'm in my home, I'm okay because the school's on fire. It's a long ways away, and there's going to be an impact of the school being on fire, and it's going to affect my life, but it's not affecting my life in an immediate way.
Right.
And I would say Vietnam was a lot the same. It was something that we saw on TV. It was a long ways away. Does it affect my day-to-day life? Not really. It could when I get old enough. If I get drafted into it and have to go over there and serve. If the school would continue to burn and start catching other businesses and homes in the area on fire, and then that expands out. It's going to impact me eventually, but somebody else is dealing with it. The firemen are going to put that fire out. And Vietnam was kind of the same thing. The Army was fighting the war. The Air Force was involved because they were flying missions. I suppose the Marines were involved, and the Navy we had river boats that were fighting in the jungles, and so all the services were involved in it in some way. But the impact to us back home, what it did, Carly, is it got kids politically engaged. Because the kids were the ones that were going to have to go fight the war.
Right.
And they said, we don't understand why we need to do this. We've been over there for a long time. We're not making any progress or not winning. And you're saying that we have to go over there and give up whatever life we have back here. We were drafted into the Army for 2 or 3 years, and for that period of time we have to go over and fight this war. And I know that a lot of my American brothers, because it was primarily the men that were going over to fight at the time, are not surviving. And we don't see an end point, and we don't see a purpose. So the young people got politically active on that front, on civil rights issues, on equal rights issues. And they became the change agent to make the politicians reflect more about why are we doing what we're doing, and how do we change to make things better. The young people did that. Now, I told you when I was substitute teaching,
Yeah.
from middle school on, sometimes I would talk to the kids about how they could have a say in the future of this country, because my generation did. Earth Day was created in 1969. Hubert Humphrey, who was Vice President of the United States, was our speaker at my high school.
Yeah, really.
And talked about the importance of protecting the environment, and a lot of that was driven. There was a book that was put out, I think I got one on the shelf over here, called The Whole Earth Catalog.
Yeah.
And it talks about how to live your life. It was created by students, college students.
Yeah.
How to live your life environmentally safe, because we were seeing pictures in the magazines and the newspapers of Denver and Los Angeles, and all you'd see is this big cloud sitting over the. I mean, you couldn't even see into the city to see the buildings from a distance because there was this big cloud covering. And that's kind of what drove Earth Day, and people throwing garbage into lakes and streams and rivers, and all this trash getting washed down to New Orleans. And where does that come from? Well, it starts up in Minnesota, and everybody's throwing stuff into the river. We got aware that this is a very fragile planet, and we needed to make a change. A lot of that, again, was driven by students. It was and the students, remember too, these are baby boomers.
Yeah.
So they're post-World War II babies.
Yeah.
There's millions of them, and they had a say, and they changed the course of this country. Civil rights changed because of students. Drug culture, of course, was driven by young people.
Yeah.
Earth Day was a change that came from the student generations. The equal rights movement for women to get more opportunities and educations and all those other things. The decision to put women in the Naval Academy or in all the service academies happened when I was a senior at the academy.
Oh, really?
I graduated in '74. Women came to all the service academies in 1976. The first graduating class was in 1980. So that all those decisions that were happening at that time were because of young people. And if I can comment, I see young people getting more vocal and more active now.
Of course.
Again.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, as long as they do it in a peaceful way.
True.
And what unfortunately what I see now is, some people get on a hand and they use it as an opportunity to destroy things, and I'm going, that's not the way we did it. That's not the way Martin Luther King advocated for change.
Right.
He said we do it peacefully.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that the young people can reflect on the baby boom generation and make change.
And do you think that that huge activist culture was largely influenced by the fact that we were in war? Do you think if the Vietnam War wasn't happening, then the 1960s would have been such a...
I think that was a big part of it because again, in that context, the young men were getting drafted.
Yeah.
Not willingly serving, but being drafted and risking and dying overseas for a cause that they didn't understand.
Right.
I agree that drove them to get politically active in how the government perceived the importance of being involved in that war. And maybe you're right that that because they all of a sudden had a voice about that, they said, hey, there's this other stuff going on that we can have a voice on too.
Yeah. So I guess, just time-wise here, you got your draft, did you get your draft lottery number when you were 18 or 17?
17. Yeah.
17.
Yeah.
And did you get that before or after you decided you want to go to the Naval Academy?
I had it before.
You had it before, and then you decided you were going to go to Naval, so then you got that deferred for 4 years. And then by the time you got out of the Naval Academy, the draft was over?
I'm trying to. I think Dick Nixon did do away with the draft after the war ended.
Okay.
I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that he was the one that.
So while you were in the Naval Academy, were you training? I mean, were you training with the intent that you might be deploying to Vietnam?
We always knew that. Every summer at the Naval Academy, you go on a training exercise to experience different parts of the Navy. Mm-hmm. We got surface ships, we got aviation, we got submarines, and we got the Marine Corps is part of the Navy. It's a sister service of the Navy. And and every summer, where most colleges have time off, the kids that are at the Naval Academy go out and experience these different branches of that service, because what they want, by the time that you're a senior, you say, I did this, I did all these different branches, but this one really stood out. Mm-hmm. This is where I'd like to go. So there's a purpose there. Right after your freshman year, in fact, before your freshman year, they have what they call plebe summer, which it's like boot camp. Mm-hmm. They teach you how to wear a uniform, how to march, how to carry a weapon, how to shoot a weapon. A very regimented, routine day. You get up at 5:30. You go out and work out before you start your day, before you have breakfast, and then your classes. That's boot camp.
Yeah.
That's plebe summer. After your freshman year, what they want to do is get you on a Navy ship, mm-hmm. and have you experience what it's like to be at sea, because that's the focus of the Navy. And then every summer after that, you might get some time with the Marines to see what Marine Corps is like, get some time in airplanes and helicopters to see what flying's all about. We went on a submarine cruise for about a week, mm-hmm. underwater, to experience that. And again, by the time that you graduate, you know what you're going to end up going into. So my cruise after my freshman year, we went to the Pacific. The summer before, the class ahead of me had gone, actually anchored in off the coast of Vietnam, mm-hmm. and they actually went on the shore in Vietnam, not to participate in any combat operations, right. but just to kind of experience what it's like to be deployed in a combat zone, and what it's like to be in country, and mm-hmm. How the military interacts with the civilian population, that kind of stuff. And we were thinking that we would probably go to Vietnam too, mm-hmm. For our what was called the youngster cruise, and it turned out that we went over to the South Pacific, but we didn't go to Vietnam. We went to New Zealand and Australia instead. Then Australia actually was kind of a respite point for people that served in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. They might be, 6 months in country, and then they get what they call R&R, rest and rehabilitation period, and they'd send them to Australia because it kept them over there, but give them a couple of weeks off. Yeah. And then send them back to Vietnam to continue their tour. And I think people that deployed, a year was all that was ever asked in country. And you'd have to volunteer if you wanted more tours over there.
Yeah.
So, again, I knew, we all, especially at the academies, we tracked what was going on in Vietnam, and there was a possibility that we would go over there even as students, but it didn't happen during my year.
Okay. So, were there ever any instances during training, any accidents or something that happened whilst training, or did you think it was pretty adequate?
At the academy?
Yeah.
You know what's interesting about training, and I thought about this. While I was at the academy, and after the academy actually, because I flew jets. I flew in jets as a navigator mission specialist, not as a pilot. But all the training we ever did, I would say the majority of the training that we did was how to deal with emergency situations. For Navy ships, we had to learn how to fight fires, because fire can kill people quicker than anything else. And in a closed ship, we had to learn how to repair major structural damage where you got water gushing in, and
Yeah.
how do you control flooding in a ship, because you flood, you sink.
Yeah.
In airplanes, we had to deal with, how do you respond to damage to the airplane? How do you respond to system malfunction, system breakdowns, loss of oil pressure? What do you do if you're, for some reason, running out of gas quicker than, if your aircraft is damaged and you're leaking fuel? How do you respond? How does the airplane fly if all of a sudden the engines quit?
Yeah.
Is there a way to glide the airplane in? How do you land the airplane in water if you're in the middle of the ocean? All this stuff. So a lot of what we do is training for emergency situations. Oh, by the way, we also have to learn how to conduct assaults. We have to learn how to fire guns at seas and missile systems at seas that provides some self-protection. We have to learn how to fight in the air, against another airplane that's trying to shoot us down. So there's all that training. There's a ton. I mean, that's all we do is train.
Yeah.
And so at the academy, a lot of what we did was learn military operations, military tactics, and emergency situations. We learned how to do ship repair and how to fight fires and how to wear oxygen masks, and everything has to be safety driven for survival at
So
sea.
you prepared you pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess like the next section would be about talking about during Vietnam, during the war. We kind of touched a lot about why, your understanding of why we're there and how it's kind of controversial and such. Do you remember? So I guess you never went out during Vietnam. So you were in high school and at the Naval Academy during the war, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did your brother ever end up getting deployed?
No, he. I mentioned that he had the 4-year deferment, and then his degree was in architecture, and it required 5 years of school, and he got a 1-year extension on his deferment, and that would have put him at like 72.
Close to the end.
Yeah, and I think he got married then too. So now he had 2 reasons to not be drafted. He was older than 18. He was probably 23 at that point. He was married, so and the war was being drawn down, so he never got called out.
Never got called out. That's cool. How did you receive information about the war, and how did that change your perspective? So like, was it more, because I guess when you were in the academy, was it really direct information about the war? Like, were you constantly surrounded by by information, or how did you get different information about what was going on?
Well, that's a great question. In high school, of course, everything is driven by the news and the paper. It'd be front page, the battles that were being fought and the casualties that were being experienced by our side and by the other side. The types of objectives that were trying to be met. I mean, and a lot of times it's just, we got to take that hill.
Yeah.
And then what? We knew a lot about, if I didn't mention it, the aviators that were getting shot down and then POW camps. Everybody wore wristbands with the names of POWs or MIAs.
Yeah.
Just to remember, constant reminder, here's somebody that's missing. We don't know where they are. Or we might know that they're in a POW camp, but they're missing. And everybody had these little silver bands with the name of a POW on it. And certainly high school and college kids would wear those bands. And I think a lot of people still have them. But like I said, we had embedded reporters that would be reporting. Dan Rather, who was a legendary commentator, would have in-field reports about combat efforts. And basically they just report on it. They wouldn't always make judgments. They'd let the public make their own judgments as to whether what we were doing was the right thing. There were some very vivid pictures that were published in the paper, and that tempered a lot of people's opinions on whether the war was the right thing to do.
Yeah.
When I got to the academy, we would have graduates that would come back and talk to us about the things that they did during the war. And probably the most memorable of those graduates that came back to talk to me and help train me and my classmates was a guy named Oliver North, who has a program called War Stories on Fox. And Oliver North was a historic figure because he was called in to testify during the Iran-Contra hearings, if you're familiar with that. But that was well past Vietnam. Yeah. But he was an inspirational leader and instructor for us when I was at the academy, and he had done amazing things and won many combat awards for his service and saved many people's lives, Americans' lives, fighting for our country. Yeah. And he was just an inspirational guy. Everybody that I went to school with said this guy's going to be a general in the Marine Corps someday, maybe commandant of the Marine Corps. And then his career ended because of this Iran-Contra situation, and he had to testify in Congress, and his career was basically over at that point, which is unfortunate. But yeah, we had influences certainly from the press, the same as the rest of the nation, and then we had personal contact with people that were involved in the fighting, whether it was on the ground or providing some kind of support from the ships at sea. Yeah. The things that we didn't know about are the types of weapons and agents that we use to try to help us win the war. And if you're familiar with Agent Orange, Oliver North actually has cancer, or has fought cancer. That's a direct result of his exposure to Agent Orange. Huh. But they all they called it at the time was a defoliant. Yeah. Something that killed jungle overgrowth because we wanted to see the enemy and we couldn't see it. So they used this killing agent of plant life, and of course, nobody knew what it was going to do to the human system, and it was detrimental in the long term.
Yeah.
But even the guys that were coming back, they tell about combat and the environment that they're fighting in the jungles and stuff like that. But they were probably carrying this carcinogen in their system that was ultimately going to affect their health.
Were there experiences like that? Like, did you ever find yourself not aware of, but like, did you ever notice that you weren't receiving a ton of information about the war? Like, did you ever say like, oh, it seems like they're being kind of secretive about this, or did you feel like you were pretty well informed the whole time?
I thought I was pretty well informed, and if we asked the questions, we would generally get the answers. Especially at the academy, people were interested in making us as knowledgeable as possible about what they did in a combat environment and what we were going to be called on to do if we ever got in that situation. But I'll say this, Carly, because of the young people's movement against the war, and maybe Jim Kahn talked about this too, there was an anti-war sentiment throughout the country, and it was devastating for us as students at the service academies. Anybody that wore a uniform was looked down on by the American public.
That's what he said.
And we didn't even have to wear uniforms to be looked down on at the time because of the culture. Every young men all had long hair.
Yeah.
And if you had a short haircut, everybody knew right away that you were in the military, whether you were in a uniform or not.
Yeah.
And that led to people having very strong negative feelings and opinions about what you do for your career.
Yeah.
For your career choice. Not even if it's a career, even if you're drafted. And the Vietnam vets say this to this day, is that they came back to this country and they got spit on and rocks thrown and degrading comments, and it was just not a fun time to represent your country. And because of that, they always rank careers and say what's the best,
right,
the most honorable career that you, and at the time might have been, being an engineer or being a lawyer or something like that. But being in the military, nobody had any respect for anybody that served their country. Which
is insane, and that's what Jim talked about too, was that they were instructed to just go home and change as fast as they could before they went and did anything. You definitely did not go anywhere in uniform. And what I told him too is I think it's crazy that was the sentiment, because especially now, and I guess just ever since then, military, it's kind of a taboo thing to hate on, right? Like, you just respect the military despite what you think about, any type of war sentiment. They're fighting for your country. And
so I often tell this story. I went to the academy in 1970, graduated in 74.
Yeah.
I served on active duty until 1982.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, really on active duty for about 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I stayed in the reserves for another 25 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
In the year 2000, I had done a reserve weekend here in the Twin Cities, and I went to the grocery store on the way home.
Okay.
In the year 2000, 30 years of wearing the uniform,
a
woman came up and said, "Thanks for your service." First time everybody thanked me. And I'm a senior naval officer at that point in time, and I gave her a hug and I said, "You don't know how much that means."
Oh.
So it's a different mindset on the part of the country. I love the fact that people are respectful of people that are serving. Everybody's volunteering now.
Yeah.
But there's a whole generation of older veterans that never heard that.
Wow.
And that's why anytime I see anybody that's wearing a uniform or wearing some memorabilia from fighting in past wars,
Yeah.
you have to go up and you have to thank those guys, because for 10 years during Vietnam,
Nothing.
they got beat up. I mean, they got spit on. They got
Yeah. Do you know of like
disrespected.
any specific people or something that happened to, or was it just kind of like knowledge, like you just knew that?
It's well, I mean, like I said, I never got complimented. I never got commended for my service for 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's because the military just was not held in high regard for a long time after Vietnam.
Yeah.
And now it's a different story. We understand, the commitment that young men and women make, and the separation from family, and going in harm's way, and whatever the nation decides is the right place and time for you to use your training and go defend the country.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we can talk. We'll talk a little bit more about after the war later. But before we move on to kind of a weird question, but if you could explain the war in one word, what would it be, and why would you choose it? The Vietnam War. Yep. In one word.
What would
It's a
be a
hard
good
question.
word? No, I'm just looking for the right word.
Yeah.
I would say there's a better word, but I would say ill-defined. And I say that because we never had a clear understanding, like I was saying earlier. We never had a clear understanding of why we were there.
Yeah.
If that would have been made known and made sense to the American people, people would have been behind it and supported it.
But it wasn't.
It wasn't, and being undefined, you question, why do it?
Yeah.
And jumping ahead 40 years, I say the same thing. Anytime we get involved any place in the world, we need to have a clear understanding. The public needs to have a clear understanding of why we're involved and what the ultimate objective is. And every effort must be made to achieve that objective as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that was in there.
Otherwise, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, and it sure did.
To me, it's just like it's like we're putting targets out there.
Yeah.
We're giving somebody something to shoot at instead of saying, no, they're there to do a job. Let's let them do their job. Get them home as quick as we can. Turn the country back over to the people that own the country, that live there, and have them reestablish a safe form of government.
Yeah.
That should be our objective. We never had that in Vietnam. Nobody understood why, how long.
And it's kind of a necessary thing too, I bet, when you're fighting in a war.
Well, it's not just the fighters. It's the politicians need to step up to the plate and make sure that they understand it,
Right.
and that they're conveying that message to their constituents. If they can't do that, maybe we need to rethink before we send our people out to combat.
Yeah. Well, then I guess a follow-up question to that. Once the war was over, did life return back to normal, or were things kind of permanently changed, or how long did? Because I guess you were still pretty involved you were very that's when you started your active duty, was after the war was over.
Mm-hmm.
So did you notice a change in the atmosphere after the war was over?
You know what's interesting, Carly, is whether we're actively fighting or we're symbolically fighting, after Vietnam, our direction became focused on the Cold War. We were still very cautious about communism.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union was our principal I won't say enemy, but the principal threat to the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that goes back to there was a Russian leader named Nikita Khrushchev, and at one point he was trying to deploy missiles and possibly nuclear weapons in Cuba to threaten the United States.
Yeah.
And having had that experience during the Kennedy administration, we understood that they didn't like us.
Yeah.
That they were intent on, becoming the dominant world power. And the majority of time that I was on active duty, we were fighting the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the Reagan years. And Reagan had a purpose to
Right.
win and end the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
And he was able to do that without firing a shot.
Yeah.
But when I was deployed in the Mediterranean, which is in the mid to late 70s up until 1980 is when I came off my last cruise.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, Russia's right there. From the Mediterranean. So all my cruises were in the Mediterranean here. Russia's up here.
Yeah.
And Russia would deploy. They had ports in the Black Sea, and then they'd come down and they'd sail around and watch what the carriers were doing in the Mediterranean.
Oh.
So we played cat and mouse with the Russians all the time. We'd be flying our jets off the carriers, and they'd have airplanes that would come out and intercept us and kind of watch what we're doing. They'd fly over close over the ships, and
Yeah.
it was all cat and mouse game. They'd have ships that would follow along carrier to watch flight operations, so they understood tactically how we operated carriers at sea. They didn't have as sophisticated technology as we had, but they were trying to build up their forces to keep up with us. They were building submarines to try to keep up with our submarine forces, and it was all cat and mouse.
Yeah.
And eventually what Reagan did is he built up the military to the point where they lost the ability. They ran out of money. They couldn't keep up with us economically to have the same types of weapon systems.
Mm-hmm.
And it really kind of led, I think, to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and they broke apart.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the Cold War. Tearing down the Berlin Wall and unifying Germany, and all that stuff happened during the Reagan years. So the military always has to have a purpose out there to do what we do.
Right.
And it's number one, protecting our values that are defined in the Constitution. We take an oath to defend the Constitution. We don't take an oath to the president.
Yeah.
We take an oath to the Constitution, and the president has to direct us to do things that allow us to protect the freedoms that are defined and our rights that are defined in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always there's always somebody out there that we're thinking, okay, who's the bad guys?
Right.
Who are the bad guys right now?
Yeah.
You ever think about it?
Sometimes, but it's kind of.
Here's 4. Russia, China, North Korea,
Yep.
and Iran.
It's a lot of bad guys.
And well, they're bad guys, but they're just kind of out there doing what world powers do.
Yeah.
They say, well, let's see, I have a lot of resources. I have the ability to exert influence around the world, and then we say, okay, well, we got to keep our eye on them. See that they don't do anything to really, when they start killing a lot of their own citizens, or when they start trying to take over other countries, and we go, they shouldn't do that.
Right.
They have their own boundaries. They have their own resources. We have a world economy now. Let's work within that system instead of saying, I'm going to go out and grab some more stuff. North Korea, what the heck are they doing? They're launching missiles to try to reach the United States now. What? What do you think? So there's always somebody out there that we have to be aware of, and a lot of our training is to deal with, okay, what happens if something happens in this area of the world? There's a lot of stuff going on around the world, and we have to be aware of all of it. We're what people call an island nation. We're surrounded by water. We're dependent on resources that we get from all over the world. We're dependent on protecting. Our Navy protects sea lanes around the world to make sure that we have commerce that's transported all over. And that's one of our missions. It's a peacetime mission. It's not a combat mission.
Yeah.
Unless somebody tries to block the sea lanes or tries to disrupt trade for some reason. The world has gotten a lot smaller, certainly in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And a country like the United States has a major role in to make sure that we've got world order to allow all the countries to exist harmoniously.
Right. That's a good answer. So I guess before we move on to looking back from today, are there any other specific memories or vivid experiences from that Vietnam War era that stick with you, or things that you saw or stories that you heard that you just remember for some reason? You said a lot.
I think anytime you consider war, war is brutal. I remember reading about World War I and the use of some of the chemical agents that they'd throw these gases on the battlefield, and they'd seep into foxholes and bunkers, and kill people by the hundreds or the thousands, and then and then there's these world organizations that would say, we can't allow these weapons to be used, right? Geneva Conventions. How do we conduct war? War is not civil, but how do we conduct a war in a more civil way?
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
So, and then I remember in World War II, they started using different weapons, and of course the nuclear weapon was deployed, and then we go, well, that's a terrible weapon. How do we control that? And yet it proliferates and more countries, get these. They're world destructive weapons. I mean, we could destroy our world if everybody started launching their weapons and we had all these nuclear clouds covering the earth. We're gone. Yeah, we should have controls. In Vietnam, they used things that weren't intended to be weapons that ended up to be weapons. Agent Orange. I mean, we talk about the Vietnam vets that are affected with the carcinogens from Agent Orange. You go, well, what about the people that live in the country?
Yeah.
They had to continue to live there. We were only deployed for 6 months or a year. They used napalm, which was a burning agent. I don't know if you're familiar with napalm at all, but there was a very vivid picture on Time Life magazines. There's some magazine that had a cover picture of this Vietnamese child that was hit with napalm, and it burned her clothes off, and her skin was all burned off. She's still alive today.
Wow.
And they showed this naked young, probably 6 or 7 or 8 year old girl running down the street, crying, and she was burned all over the place from this. So the takeaway from any war is that it's not pretty, and it can get really ugly if people use the most horrific weapons, and they continue to develop more and more horrific weapons, so that somebody can win and somebody's going to lose.
Yeah.
So the takeaway from war, as I reflect back, is the images of how harmful it can be to world order.
Yeah.
And we should avoid it at all costs. But unfortunately, human nature says that people have different viewpoints.
Yep.
People have different long-term goals. People are power-driven, and you start adding all those together, and you're gonna always have conflict. Well, the Bible say, "Blessed be the peacemakers." And there are people out there. There are countries out there that want to be peacemakers. They don't want to see people. I'd like to think that the United States is that type of country.
Yeah.
That we're an agent of peace. But I'm a strong believer that the best way to preserve the peace is to be strong. And people object to us spending as much as we do in defense. I'd say in part that's correct. But I think it's in part correct because there's so much waste in government spending.
Yeah.
If we could be more efficient in the way that we spend, the need to have a strong military is very important. I would love to have a military that never had to deploy. Right. That never had to fight wars.
Right.
But if we don't have a military that's strong, then we become a target. A vulnerable target.
Right. Right. Well, looking back from, I guess, 2016, what do you think, if anything, we could have done differently during the war era to maybe have a better outcome? Or do you think we could have done something differently? Or what do you think?
As I said before, we had a military that could beat anybody. We never had a commitment to win. we never had a well-defined reason for being there.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I always ask whenever we get involved in any military activity is I say, what's the direct risk to the United States?
Mm-hmm.
This is happening thousands of miles away from our country.
Right.
Where's the risk to the United States? That's the number one thing that politicians need to convey to the people.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what happens if we don't get involved, if we don't engage. Mm-hmm. Here's the real potential risk to the United States and to the world, especially now with the world being as small as it is, the world economy being as important as it is. We need to say, okay, what's the real risk here? And if we can't convey that message to the public, we should never get involved. Mm-hmm. If you can convey that to the public is going to say, I understand. Mm-hmm. I'm okay, I'm supportive. I'm willing to have the military send our sons and daughters to war. Mm-hmm. And if they can't do it, then we shouldn't get involved. Mm-hmm. But if we get, and like I said before, if we get involved, we should get involved to win.
Yeah.
And get in and win as quickly as possible. Mm-hmm. And the world needs to know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if the world knows that, the world's going to be a lot less willing to do risky things, mm-hmm. to try to expand power and influence.
Well, I don't know if that's it, but what lessons or so did you learn from that time that you'd want others to remember? I guess about this time in history. What did you learn that you think is valuable?
The lessons?
Mm-hmm. Maybe we can apply today, or...
Well, the lessons of government I just went over. Mm-hmm. I think the lessons for the public would be to expect and demand more from government, and to have a higher level of respect and regard for those that are willing to stand up for our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's true. And then have your views on the war changed over time, or have they stayed pretty stagnant?
What's interesting, though, for anybody that studies history, is that we learn more over time as people examine events more closely and get some inside information, mm-hmm. on why things happen the way they did and what drove decisions, stuff like that. So we always continue to learn. My calling, and anybody that joins the military understands that there's a risk, in serving. But if you become part of an organization, it's like playing for the New York Yankees. Mm-hmm. If you play for the New York Yankees, or if you play for the New England Patriots, you're joining an organization that understands winning. Mm-hmm. And you like being part of that team because you say, you know what, I can be a world champion because I'm part of this organization. This is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. I feel like I'm part of the best team in the world, right?
Yeah.
the U.S. military should be that way. That the people that hold up their hand, take their oath, say, and for the most part, I think everybody that joins the military understands that the U.S. is
Yeah.
a force for good, but one of the strongest militaries, if not, in fact, there should be no question, we have the strongest military in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that, they should know that we have the best training, the best equipment, the best people, the most knowledgeable war fighters in the world, and that if you're going to be part of an organization, you should be part of this organization. So there's some comfort in knowing that if you're going to join the U.S. military, you're on a championship team. But I will add that, as we're seeing today, the way that we fight an enemy has changed. Because instead of fighting armies and navies of other countries, we're fighting cells of people that hide amongst us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a paradigm shift.
Right.
That forces us to look at what we do and how we do it, and kind of redefine how we're going to fight enemies in the future.
Yeah.
Isn't that strange?
Yeah, it's definitely.
And the other strange thing, Carly, is that many of our, we were an island nation, and all the wars that we fought were around the world.
Yeah.
And now we have enemy cells embedded in our own population.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we root those enemies out?
Yeah.
And take care of them? And it's not always in a humane way, but in a society, it really has to be kind of a humane way to deal with enemies. Because we can't go door to door and say, you're an enemy.
Right.
We can't do that in our own country.
Yeah.
Our system doesn't allow that. So it's really a different way to look at our world situation, because we've, again, as part of a smaller world environment, we have people from all over the world as part of becoming part of our culture.
Yeah.
Yet they hold on to these values from wherever they came from, and they look at the West as being the evil empire.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're part of our own society, and they're trying to disrupt that way of life.
Mm-hmm.
How do we fight that? The jury's out. We're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's probably something that your generation will have to deal with for, maybe the next 30 or 40 years, maybe the rest of your life.
Yeah. Who are we fighting?
So I'm going to interview you in about 30 years and say, what did you learn in the course of your life? And
Deal. I'll hold you to it. And then I guess going off that too, do you sense any parallels between, you kind of talked about this before, our current either international or domestic aggressions and those during Vietnam, and like the atmospheres both domestically and abroad in 2016 and during Vietnam? Because a lot of people have drawn some parallels.
That's a great question too, and I think as I was just saying, a lot of the enemy is coming into our country now, and finding ways to infiltrate and integrate into the fabric of our society, but with a hidden agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And what we see is that there's areas of the world that's originating from.
Mm-hmm.
The question that you have to ask is why the anger towards the West from those regions? Is it because we got involved in Iraq? Is it because we got involved with Iran? with Libya, with Egypt, with a lot of the Middle Eastern countries that are fairly volatile.
Yeah.
It amazes me now to think that in our world, a lot of the conflicts that have occurred have been religious, and that hasn't ended.
Yeah.
So, one of the neat things about the United States is we respect people's right to worship or not worship any way they want.
Mm-hmm.
That should be a good thing.
Yeah.
But then we have religious segments of all different faiths that say our way is the only way.
Yeah.
And then for some reason, some warped, distorted reason, they say, well, we can kill anybody that doesn't believe the way that we do. That's the big challenge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's always been there, Carly. The fact that it continues on today amazes me.
Yeah.
When there are options, and the options are accept and respect people's rights to believe the way they do. But if that right says we can take somebody's life if they don't, then that's not a religion that we can respect.
Yeah.
So that's where we're faced with a real challenge in the future. Is how do we resolve that?
Yeah. Yeah. Very. I don't know.
that's again that probably is a big challenge for your generation to deconflict that difference.
Yeah. No, I agree. We'll figure it out.
Think so?
I hope so. We'll have to. Well, those are like the questions that I prepared, but I don't know, is there anything else that you want to touch on, or any other stories or lessons or something from that time or time following that you think is pertinent to know?
I'll share a story with him.
Okay.
Just a few weeks, maybe a month or two back, we had an annual convention of the winners of the Medal of Honor. Did I talk about this? And it was in the Twin Cities, and it was in Minneapolis. And I had the opportunity to drive a couple of Medal of Honor winners to an event. We had, I think in the Twin Cities, we had about, it seems to me, between 50 and 70 Medal of Honor winners. A lot of Medal of Honor winners get them dying in the act of saving people's lives.
Right.
These were living Medal of Honor winners who had survived whatever their experience was that allowed them to win that. And I learned a lot about the Medal of Honor. Military people salute somebody that's wearing the Medal of Honor, but they're saluting the medal. Isn't that something? I went to a local high school that two of our Medal of Honor awardees were talking at. And they talked about their personal experiences. You know, what did they do that allowed them to get that recognition?
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's an event that happens over a period of hours or maybe a couple of days, but it's not a lifetime achievement thing. It's all of a sudden they're engaged in this battle, this event, and they do superhuman things to save fellow soldiers, to save themselves, to take the hill.
Yeah.
to win the battle. And some of the kids, we were at a high school, and some of the kids would ask, what caused you to do what you did to win that award?
Yeah.
What caused you to put everything at risk to win that award? And they would say, it's all about family. The people that I serve with, that I fight with, they're my brothers, my sisters, and I'm not going to let anybody hurt my family.
Oh, that's so sweet.
And what was interesting as I talked to these guys, that was their environment growing up.
Mm-hmm.
They oftentimes came from big families. They came from a close network of relationships that they had growing up. They understood the importance of taking care of one another.
Yeah.
And then they became members of the military, and they said, I'm going to take care of my people. So I think that's the lesson that we can all take away is to look out for the people around us, because it makes us better people.
I agree. It's pretty universal. That's a good note. Is there anything else that you think we missed, or if there's something you can let me know later too, but no?
No, I don't think so. I think unless you got other questions, Carly, go ahead. This is your.
I don't know, it's your story. But we definitely, I don't know, we talked about a lot, and
We talked for 2 hours.
we did. Well, we did.
That's a lot.
That is a lot. But covered a lot, I think. So, unless you got anything else you can think of.
No, I don't. I think we're good.
Okay, I'll just